So I know that several of you on here probably know a lot more about the calendar than what I do, so that's great. So I'm going to give all of you a chance to say something in a little while as well. Is there anybody who isn't a little bit familiar with the calendar, the biodynamic calendars, or do you all have a bit of awareness and knowledge of them? It's just, there's no point in kind of going over things that people already know well. Or is there? I don't know. Um, what we had intended to do, Simon and I, because Simon can't be here, and I know, Jane, you don't know very much, but it will be a good learning to just go over some things, is we kind of thought that it would be really good to have some questions from everybody about what you might like to know, and that we could respond to that. Um, Obviously, if you are a member of Biodynamics New Zealand, you're familiar with our calendar and the layout with the sort of sky planetary zodiac charts here and the information down the bottom, which reads from, it's always tricky doing this back to front, across the page. So you've got like the date, ascending, descending moon, where the planets are in relation to the zodiac, apogee, perigee, full moon, new moon, nodes, where the sun has changed signs, and there's an area in the middle for notes. I just wrote in, well, potential one opportunity to put down the horns. And then we've got dates across here and other aspects of planetary conjunctions, oppositions, etc., that when you're quite an advanced person and you've used the calendars for a while, you might look at some of those rhythms as well. And then on the top up here, we have the breakdown of your earth, water, fire, and air signs and their relationship to the zodiac. And we tend to use the constellation names rather than the astrological names, because this is based on observable sidereal astrology, observation, perhaps astronomy, you might say, where you can walk outside and you can look up into the sky and you can see the moon in its ascending, descending phase, waxing, waning phase. At the moment, you can see Jupiter, and if you were aware, maybe not quite a week ago, there was a lovely conjunction between the moon and Jupiter. So the whole point with the calendar is to sort of give you some idea of the many layered rhythms that you can start to pay attention to, that when you are wanting to plant something, sow seeds, harvest something, you can look at the correlation of the different rhythms for the optimum day. But as everybody who's used this calendar and been involved in BD for a while will know, there's the ideal, and then there's I've got time today, so I'm going to do it. And so where those waxing, waning rhythms and the ascending, descending rhythms, which is often something that people aren't so familiar with, where the moon is going north and south in a month, the same way that the sun does in a year. You've got different influences on the root or lower parts of the plant in descending phase, and more influences in the top part of the plant in its ascending phase. Obviously, if you're closer to full moon, you're going to have another 12 hours of light. So the growth is going to be stimulated in those particular parts of the plants. With new moon, it's going to be less. So if you want to enhance something or not suppress, but cut back on the energies, you can play around with that a little bit. And so at the moment, the moon has just finished its descending phase. So it's not on the horizon. It's only about not even 45 degrees, but further north than where it is in its peak ascending phase, where you can look up like at midday and it's up over your head. So if you're not familiar with those, or even if you are familiar with those, it's really interesting to observe that. And you notice where the sun rises and sets each day, where the moon rises and sets each day, and how that moves throughout the year with these solstice equinox rhythms that used to be seasons that we could actually go, oh, it's summer now, it's spring now. We don't have that at the moment, and it's becoming a little more challenging perhaps to work out each day what to do, which is another reason from my viewpoint that using the biodynamic preparations can help to really try and maintain some of that natural balance as things are in their chaotic phase. So those two rhythms of the waxing waning moon and the descending ascending moon are probably enough to keep the average gardener person quite happy for a long time, simply working with those two things. I'm going to show Brian Keats's astro calendar, which I've used for a long time because in Australia I've learnt my biodynamics with him. This is still available online, but he has a different layout for those people who are sort of visual and creative, which I am a bit more. I'll just turn that up a wee bit. So you have it in a different layout to the Biodynamic New Zealand calendar, where you have your waxing waning moon here. And then you have here your zodiac signs. And then you have in pictorial form the division into leaf, flower, root, and seed fruit signs that go through the month. And if you're not familiar with the connection with those, the fire signs are connected with fruit and seed, the water signs with leafy aspects, the flower signs with the airy aspect, and what have I forgotten? The root, the root is connected with the earth signs. And so you can start to sort of get to know these relationships a little bit and how they might be impacted with a full moon, or we've actually got a lunar eclipse coming here earlier, and it's going in its new moon phase. And to complicate it maybe a little bit further, but just so I run through this with you, and that might stimulate a whole lot of conversations. The moon is further away from the earth for a couple of weeks each month, and then it's closer to the earth for a couple of weeks each month. And so obviously when it's close, if it's connecting with a full moon, and also it happens to be in a water sign like leafy signs, there's the potential for a lot more watery, intense tides, movement in the, volcanic activity in the earth, a lot more stimulation in the plants. Same for us women, monthly cycles. We've got that monthly journey that we follow. If it's further away, perhaps new moon, and maybe it's in a an earth sign, it might not be so obvious what the influences are. They might not be so intense. There's other things in here that we could look at, like nodes and so forth, which some people do pay attention to, which are these little like hook and eye signs, which are where there's a crossing of the equator, and so the influences are a little bit unknown. So some people don't plant 12 hours outside of that.
There's a mistake there you made.
What did I say?
The node is crossing the sun's path, not the equator.
Oh, sorry. Yes, that's true.
and you've been mixing up the signs and the constellations. I presume that that calendar you're showing is showing the constellations and not the signs. The
Yes.
signs begin
Yeah.
at uh, the first degree of Aries um, on the northern spring equinox, which is the southern autumn equinox. And so the signs are just about to enter into Aries, and the constellation is somewhat different, almost
Yes.
one set, about
It's about
26 degrees out.
yeah, 2.5, 3 weeks difference. So you'll see that in the top here. Thanks, Peter, for that. That like I said, it's the observable astronomical view rather than, you know, what you might get if you ask for an astrology chart. So the names tend to be a little bit different, and you'll notice, as Peter said, that we're actually still, we've just gone through the equinox here. So we're moving in front of Pisces soon, and we've left Aquarius behind. So from an astrological viewpoint, they might be 2.5 weeks different, and might think that we're in Aries, but we're not actually there yet. So that's a little complication. So anyway, this calendar has different pictures compared to our one.
Can you go back to that a little bit, Christine, about what have you got is there kind of a theory on why it's shifted so far out of what we would understand as, I mean, what of my understanding, you know, star signs kind of thing, is that they are, you know, earlier on. Like what's shifted that further down the track, the constellations?
Okay.
So Peter might be the best one to answer that, because there's something called the precession of the equinoxes, and that's a bigger picture. So Peter, do you want to answer that?
So at the time of Christ, approximately, the sign and the constellation were the same. Since then, every 72 years, the equinox moves backwards 1 degree. And so in a lifetime, that moves 1 degree, and so it increases the difference by 1 degree. And the signs are when you want to talk about the human being, the ego-incarnated human being. All the rest of nature apply the most applicable are the constellations, in other words, what you see in the sky. So what we're dealing with in biodynamics is definitely the constellations. It applies to the weather and the animals, to the plants, to geology, you know, whatever else in nature you want to apply that sort of thing to. The constellations are the ones to look at.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah, and you've got, thank you, Peter, that's really helpful. We've still got the names that we might know here. Often people change them. So instead of having Gemini, it's the twins. Instead of the Leo, it's the lion. Instead of Virgo, it's the Virgin, and so on, the Archer, Sagittarius. So that can help sometimes just with making that difference, because we're now also 2024 years on from that point that Peter was talking about, and so things have moved, and some things, I mean, nothing stays the same. Everything's moving, everything's spiraling, everything's interactive. It's always moving, and the only way we can kind of get a handle on that is to sort of look at, and I'll just use this one again, these pictures of the movement of the planets and the movement of the zodiac from our position on Earth. It's not saying that's how it is, but we're our point of reference. wherever we are in the world, then we can look up, and we should be able to see at 8 p.m. on the 15th of March that you can see whatever the constellations are above you in the world, and you can also see where the planets are, because this changes constantly all the time, every month. And if I was to go through the others, and so in the past, I suppose, farmers walked over the land or rode a horse, had time, went, slowly through their days, had that connection through their feet and their heads and their hearts to the land. Today, everything's kind of got speeded up. We're on big, if you're farming, you're often on big tractors, you're riding motorbikes, and, you're roaring and rushing here and there and applying all sorts of things to the land. But this taking the time to observe, and quite possibly Peter and Katrina might back me on this, but in a way, biodynamics is like 90% observation. Where am I on the land? Where am I in the world? Not only what are my soil conditions, but what are my weather conditions? What are my conditions as the person growing fruit, vegetables, gardening, farming, whatever you happen to be doing? And coming back to that connection again with that whole environment, which is constantly in movement. And so there's no recipe book that says, here, this is what you do, and you do this every day for the rest of your life. The recipe book from a biodynamic viewpoint is spend time with your environment, learning about it. Look at what would grow in the land rather than what you want to grow on the land, and listen for that response. And through that building of that, what we might call intuitive connection, as you try different things, make mistakes, try again, try something different, you come to understand what it is that works on your particular place as kaitiaki on the land. So,
yeah, the old farmers had quite a lot of vision that we have lost. We have become quite divorced from nature because we live in concrete jungles very often, and have lost touch with nature outside. We have come into developing the intellect and cleverness, whereas we need to once more learn how to observe and develop new organs of vision and hearing and whatever. And that is done by just living with the land and listening and being quiet within, so that you can hear what's being said to you. It develops over time. It doesn't happen all at once, and it just requires steady, constant practice. So there are other places where more specific instructions are given, but that's basically what we've got to learn to do, is to really look and believe what you see. Really take the time to look and live with, and just be quiet, because if you're busy talking, you can't hear anybody else talking.
Well, good answer, Peter. Any other questions from anybody around anything? Feel free, just put your hand up. And
I have a question. I would love to
Katrina?
ask, and this is something I heard recently, not from a biodynamic source, but I saw that the sun's energy changes through the course of the day. And what I saw was that in the morning there's more, is it serotonin that gives us energy, and in the afternoon there's more melatonin, which helps us sort of get ready to wind down. That it's just that, and I don't know where to look up the actual sort of scientific information about this, but it made me sort of appreciate that it's important to be outside throughout the day, but rather than sort of thinking, oh, I want to transplant those seedlings or do that stir in the afternoon, to balance that with time outside in the morning to get the sort of full spectrum of sun warmth. And I just wondered if anyone could speak to that, sort of within the context of the breathing in and out.
You raise a very, very important question. Manfred Pfeiffer used it to a certain degree with his application of preparation 501, and the action of 501 will vary according to when in the day you put it on. I've found out what happens in the afternoon, and I don't recommend anybody else do it unless they're tired of mowing their lawn. It's like you have the whole season in one day. In the spring, early in the morning, you have the sun's effect is of the spring, and as you mentioned, the different hormone, and the different effect on people. And then it gets towards midsummer at midday, and in the afternoon it's autumn. And if you look carefully at what all the plant world is doing through those different times, then it gives you a window of opportunity when using the preparations, and particularly preparation 501, to exploit that difference. So it can be, you can get a difference in as little as 2 hours. Ian Henderson once took 501 out to spray on a crop of, I think it was oats, it was a grain of some sort. The machinery broke down on the way out to the where the grain was, and he was 2 hours late getting it on. So instead of getting on at 9, he didn't get it on till 11. And he said the effect there was quite different. And he said it came much closer to burning than he would have expected. In other words, it completed that ripening process. So if you want to ripen something, you move to late morning or midday. If you want something not to grow, then you try in the afternoon on a sunny day. And if you want something to grow faster, then straight after sunrise. As a general broad spectrum, and you need to look at that yourself. And of course, that'll change a little bit during the seasons. So, Katrina, that was a very, very important question you brought up.
And just to add to that, I think, Katrina, too, there is this interesting event that happens in Europe, which we tend not to do, of a siesta between 12 and 2 each day. And these, long time cultural practices, shall we say, aren't there just for no particular reason. I think most of us can experience, particularly in summer, but also at other times, that between 12 and 2, we're quite sleepy and things, we want to actually have a bit of a rest, sit down, even if it's having lunch, for example. And so I have observed, just like you, and probably so as well, that if I go out to try and plant anything during that time, it's almost like the soil is sealed off. It's quite hard to actually work it. It's like if I ask the plants, which I try to do, are they happy to be planted? Then there's a resounding no. It's not a time that is like early morning or even early afternoon, and even if it's ascending or descending phase, it doesn't seem to matter so much. And I haven't tried at midnight, but I would imagine, and most of us will have that experience, if you're up after midnight, it's quite hard to get to sleep between that 12 to 2 phase. Then you're kind of up really super early morning. The best sleep really is between that 10 to 12 window. And so looking at how we're affected by these things is a good way to sort of start looking at your plants too. Around that? or questions?
If you've done therapeutic massage, part of your learning will be which organs are affected during which period of the day, and how you can work on that as diagnosis and therapeutically.
Any questions from anybody? Right,
When does the next descending start? Is it the 1st of April?
let me check for you. It's actually the 2nd, if you want to be exact. I don't know if you can see here.
And what's the best day to do to do a stir, 500 stir, or to put the cow horns in the ground?
I usually look for a descending phase root sign. So we've just gone past that, as in 17th of March. So the next best times will be, sorry, I have to look at this calendar. I've got so used to it.
If
I
you
know I'm
look at,
supposed to be promoting the biodynamic one, but I'm just, it's because I'm visual. So I will show you here.
so if you look at Monday, the 8th of
we
April,
are little carrot signs.
so you've got the perigee
Sorry.
on about the 7th or 8th of April, along with the new moon, and that would be very strong condensing process happening at that time.
Yeah, there's also a solar eclipse then. So would you still plant then, Peter? Or would
I'm
you
not
do it
talking about
earlier?
planting. Well,
I mean,
any
or putting the horns down?
anything that requires a condensing process, that would work very strongly, which the descending period is part of. So it's halfway through the descending period. It is in Pisces, but yes, the node, so there'll be an eclipse then as well. What the eclipses and the nodes often do is that they block off the function of the element boron. And most people, the soil levels of boron are somewhat indifferent anyway. And you notice it by the brassicas and radishes, which is also a brassica, tend to get hollow in the middle, which is a sign of a deficit of boron.
Okay, thank you. Just to go back to your question, Annette, I am going to put our horns down on the 4th of April, because that's a root sign, an earth sign, and there doesn't appear to be any aspects that are not favourable for that. But that doesn't mean to say that's the only time. That's just when I'm able to do it. And I thought this year we would wait till after Easter. Last year actually put them down before Easter, and for the first time ever in 30 odd years, the worms got in and actually ate through the clay capping. So Pauline and I thought, well, we'll wait and try it after Easter. But yeah, as Peter said, people will make different choices, and with their understanding, the next best time could be the 11th, 12th and 13th of April.
Okay.
I've sort of wrote them here. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, moon fully descended.
Yeah. So you're at the end of the descending phase, but Yeah, so I tend to go at the, if possible, the beginning of the descending phase, so it has that time in the ground. But once again, you know, there's all kinds of options. We just grow home garden. I guess if you had grapes or olives, or yeah, you were growing grains, or you had animals, then that might come into play. So are you a home gardener, Annette, or are you do you have
gardener.
animals as well?
Home gardener.
Home gardener.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one question about putting the horns down when the worms got in. Do you put the horns down with the opening at the bottom, or do you lay them lateral?
No, stand them, you know, the right way up, as I call it, you know, with the ends in the ground. Yeah, so it was really interesting. I mean, we obviously had last year Cyclone Katrina and massive flooding here.
Yeah, a
And
lot of
so
extra water.
whether that would have affected things, but interestingly, the year before, when I dug the horns up, they were sitting in water. But once I dried the horns out, the 500 was absolutely fine. So, you know, this is the thing. We've got to remember that what happened last year is showing its effects this year, and what is happening now is going to show its effects next year. And so it can be quite helpful to use that space in the calendar to write in, you know, what's going on, so that you can keep them like diaries and refer back to them. Oh yeah, that's right. Last time when we were thinking to do this, or put the horns down, or dug the horns up, or did 500, 501, made a cowpat pit, seaweed, you know, etc. What was actually happening? You know, currently we've had nearly 3 weeks of dry weather up here in the endless summer of the north, whereas, you know, prior to that we had months and months and months of just grey, nothing, no rain, just grey. So, you know, that's something to kind of mull over. What's been happening weather-wise? What has been the response from the plants, where they've got burnt, or whether they've kind of stopped growing and then they've suddenly started again? What are you noticing that's there that you might then look to do something a bit extra, like applying seaweed or extra cowpat pit, which will strengthen the plants? Oh good, Simon's here. You know, so there are things that you can do to help the situations. And so you might have some ideas about that, because you've had some odd weather down your way, haven't you, with some frost and snow and lots of dry as well.
Yeah, lots of dry. I just lifted my nettle prep today, actually, and I was a bit concerned because the soil above the prep was so dry. I kind of thought, oh my goodness, it's going to be, you know, completely dehydrated, but the prep was still moist in the tiles, so that was a bonus. But yeah, I mean, you know, a good amount of really dry soil, even though there's been a bit of irrigation and we've had hardly any rain. The frost doesn't tend to affect any buried preps particularly, I don't think. No, I haven't found anything like that, but certainly, yeah, each year is so different, and which is why it's so important to keep records and of your gardening or your prep making, just so that you can, yeah, start mapping out, as you said, you know, what's actually happening in the environment and with yourself, maybe.
Thank you. Hi, Simon, you made it.
I have eventually.
Well done. So none of you probably are growing grapes, but you know, Peter's very good comment about 501 in the afternoon. Perhaps, I don't know, only about, I mean, I know a little bit about olives from Australia, but not here, but possibly with grapes. Would there be times, Simon, that you would put 501 out in the afternoon and to enhance the sugars or the starch or something like that? Or do you still also tend to put it out in the morning?
I missed So I miss Peter's knowledge and wisdom regarding 501, but it's a practical situation where we only do the morning application for the prescribed benefits that the 501 morning application of 501 can do. An afternoon one, we've always considered it not a happening thing, so it's never been part of prescribed sort of. Someone's never trialed it, but a lot of the time we've got bird nets, overrow bird nets on our vines, especially down here in Central Otago. Yeah, so our fruit's ripe enough and it's tasting great. So I don't see a need for it.
Thank you.
What I would say with the 501 at this time of year is that if the fruit is off your vine or tree and the leaves are still on, then you can put perhaps a 500 and the other preparations on in the afternoon, and then on a fine, perhaps mid-morning, spray 501 to increase the sugars in the leaves, and then those sugars will, at least a third of them, will go down into the ground and feed the root colonizing microorganisms, which then get through onto feeding others. And my observation is that it is of great benefit to the fruit of the next season. The tree is much more energetic because you've just put a whole lot more carbon down at the root tips.
Okay.
But the only place I have used 501 in the afternoon and would recommend it is that if you have a large lawn and it's steep and you're sick of mowing it and you want to save petrol or energy or whatever, when
put a cap on
it at Pyro, I sprayed it twice, once in November just after mowing on a fine day, and once at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and once again in December. And that held me, I was able to keep the lawns tidy with 8 mowings a year, once in the summer, once in the winter, and once a month in the spring and the autumn. But if you've got productive land, it's a definite no-no.
Oh, thank you, Peter. So HD, I know you've been waiting for a while to ask a question, so I'll just cut through there to let you in to please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My next door neighbour he's just bought a house that he's going to renovate and resell, but he has a grapevine, red grapevine and white grapevine, and he knows how to transplant the root stock into my garden, and he'll take some root stock into his garden. So judging from what Simon was saying, my question is, how would the 501 or 500 help when I'm planting the rootstock of a vine that's already been matured?
So I'll answer that one. An application of 500, utilising the calendar at the right time, a descending root phase. The 500 will help that plant, regarding it being mature or a young vine, will help that plant find its roots deep into the soil.
Okay, so 500 at descending.
Yes, in a descending root phase.
Okay.
And that's where the calendar can help us. Instead of having to try and remember it or look at the stars all the time, the calendar will give us hearing in front of us that we don't have to remember. We just go to the calendar if we need to find those times.
Okay, Thank you.
And so HD, those dates of April for
Oh, it won't happen yet. It may
won't
not happen for a few months.
right. Okay.
He's renovating the house at the moment, so he's not ready to deal with the grapevine at the moment. It'll be a few months.
Has the grapevine still got leaves on it?
Yes, definitely, and fruit.
So the best thing that you could do there would probably be to treat around the grapevine with preparation 500 and cowpat pit, and then put some 501 on, as I've just said. 501 is really only beneficial on the leaves of plants. If there's no leaves, then you're getting into a totally different ball game.
Yeah, well, he'll cut the stem above the ground, and he'll dig around the root, and then transplant the root into my garden.
Yep.
Good.
Yep.
Nice. We'll look forward to hearing next year about how delicious your grapes are then.
I will be doing the same thing.
Is there anybody else who would like to ask a question? Nicola, you haven't asked anything. Is there anything you'd like to know, or any clarity around anything we talked about, or anything you want us to go over again? Because of course it's quite a lot, and
yeah, sometimes I just kind of, well, because there's a lot of information there, you go, well, what's the most important? Because yeah, there's the moon and all the constellations, and yeah. Yeah, so in your view, what would you look at first, or say is more important than something else?
If we go back, I'll answer this, Christine. If we go back to Rudolf Steiner, he firstly and foremost was focused on the ascending, descending phase of the moon. For the sap rising and the ferric force has been pulled back into the earth with the descending, or the astral forces coming out with the ascending. These calendars came afterwards through Maria Fun and many others, but Rudolf Steiner and the basis of the starting of the biodynamics was focused on the ascending, descending moon for the bulk of, and we've learnt then that the fire signs or the root signs, the earth signs, also have an influence on that process through that period and that phase of descending or the ascending.
Yeah, I think probably that's a really good suggestion, because it's a rhythm that we often haven't learned about. You know, like if what I tend to do is I've got places that I've lined up where I notice, now I've been here for 4 years, where the sun rises and sets, moves north and south, where the moon rises and sets and moves each month. So I tend to go out and look at it in its waxing waning phase, which is more familiar, but notice, is it more descended or more ascended? And then how's that impacting on me? You know, sitting out with a cup of tea or lunch or something, and I choose a particular plant to observe what's happening in it. You know, it's all very well after years of doing the preps, but I'm still always astonished and excited that 3 days after putting out 500, everything in my garden kind of looks like the windows have been cleared and they're standing upright, and it's kind of like, yay, I'm feeling really shiny and good now, thank you. You know, there's just something completely different. But I've learnt, I suppose, how to sort of tune into that, because I've spent lots of time drawing the plants, observing, watching, making notes over the years. But you can't ever take it for granted. You know, it's just one of those kind of astonishing things that happens. And Peter probably has been doing biodynamics the longest out of everybody here. You know, you will still go, oh yes, isn't that wonderful? And and as those ascending, descending, waxing, waning phases become more familiar to you, then you're starting to sort of make more of that connection with the earth and those cosmic rhythms that just go on automatically, you know, but they become familiar. So I would suggest that, and then maybe move to the constellation aspect of the, you know, leafy, flowery, earthy, fiery, seedy. What am I planting? What am I harvesting? What do I want to grow? Is it the oils? Is it the top part of the plant that I'm eating? What do I want? You know, do I want to make nice medicinal things, or am I growing food for myself, or, you know, things like that? So you just, when you're ready, you add another rhythm on top, and it's, you know, it starts to become more familiar.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good idea to, as was mentioned earlier, to keep notes of when you do what, and observe and keep notes of what happens. One of the things that you may well note is that the preparations are more active and last longer when you have a moist soil and when the soil has a good level of humus in it. So both those things accentuate the effectiveness of the preparations and will accentuate your happiness in the garden.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah. Is that helpful, Nicola? Or it's,
Yeah, that's good. Yep. Yeah.
Anybody else want to ask questions? Just sort of getting near the end of our
Go
time.
for it, Katrina.
Oh, it's another conversation starter more than a question. I use the cultivating conversations more to sort of connect with colleagues, but I'm pondering equinox and Easter approaching, and
And the weather starts going crazy.
watching the news coming out of Palestine and feeling the sense of the earth as one being, and as the light shifts, and even as we go from descending into ascending, and the northern hemisphere is doing the opposite, that there's this just sort of awareness of farmers all over the world following the same celestial bodies, and wondering if anyone has any sort of thoughts on meditations or practices in the garden over the Easter period that's coming.
Well, there is a book of meditations for each week, and Easter is among those. And what I have noted over the years is particularly plum trees, but also other trees, in our autumn, as it approaches the week of Easter, they will do a sort of second flowering. And so there's a sort of a spring-like influence as you go into Easter.
Sue, you got anything to add?
Oh, thanks for bringing that up, Katrina. I thought that was really nice thought. Yeah, I suppose, you know, the honouring of life and death around Easter time is quite a profound sort of thing, you know, with the whole, yeah, Easter tide. And yeah, the equinox, you know, being that sort of balancing of day and night. The moon was actually, you know, half in the daytime sky. It's quite lovely. You know, just noticing those things around those times is quite lovely. But yeah, I feel like Easter is, you know, a wonderful time for that sort of the death process, and then of, you know, of sort of the summer coming to a close and bringing in the autumn as almost a death force. But then you know, that whole rising of the Christ, I suppose, as the, you know, promise that there will be new life coming in the springtime. But yeah, I also feel that the winter is a time for us to go inward and sort of yeah, meditate on the seasons and, you know, what the season has brought for us and what we expect to do next year and next season. So yeah, it's quite a special sort of time, isn't it? Easter and equinox.
Thank you.
So
Anybody
when
else got
should-
any thoughts that either about Easter and equinox?
about life and death, that death as we understand it is birth into the spiritual world, and our birth onto the earth is in a way a passing away from the spiritual world. So it's a backwards and forwards. My mother always looked at it from the point of view that at the beginning of life you have birth, at the end of it you have death, but in between you have the time of your lives. And I look at it more from on earth here, as we live as human beings, we have a learning experience. So it's like going to school. When we have finished our lessons, we can go home again. And when you're young, of course, home is not where you want to go in a hurry.
Very nice. That's a lovely picture. And my picture that I carry is that all summer we've had this connection and this dreamlike sort of space with the cosmos. And if we, you know, we find it, well, I find it harder to think in summer. And so something has kind of woven itself around me in the warmth and the light, and it's gradually coming more into this heart space, into this kind of horizontal plane, and gathering in here, that then going through to the winter solstice is digested, hopefully. And I take time to sort of think about that. And then as spring comes again, as we move back up to that horizontal once more, we're bringing back the results of this whole process from summer through to autumn, to winter, and into spring. So whatever's happening anywhere in the world, and this going of things are being stirred and shaken, as James Bonds would say, then trying to sort of bring that kind of awareness into myself is something I try and work with. And I've got something to read, which I thought I'd finish at the end with, but I just wondered if anyone else has any thoughts. Jane, Simon, Jane.
I'd like
Annette?
to share that I've just moved on to Bert's old property at Glenberthley. So Bert was a biodynamic inspector and
fantastic.
and so he put a lot of biodynamics onto that land there, and I lived there briefly before, twice on that land, and I've just been living there since January the 21st, and the soil is incredible. I mean, it was incredible anyway, but you can still feel the effect of the biodynamics and on the land there. And even though it's probably 15 years since Bert sold that property, and so now I'm starting to do. I've put down a cow pit, and now I'm starting to do the biodynamics again on the land, and it's really, really a joy. So I just want to bring that joy into this meeting, because it's an absolute joy to be there. And there's so many bumblebees and so many insects and so many flowers that have grown, and those huge avocado trees that Bert planted that are producing like hundreds of avocados. And yeah, so
Fantastic. He would be so happy that you're back there. I mean, yeah, I know you lived there before, but that's fantastic that you're back there again. How wonderful.
It's like I've been led there, back there. Yeah.
Lovely.
Mm.
Jane, did you want to share anything at all? Easter equinox thoughts?
Well, I was actually just chatting to Katrina in the chat privately. I was saying that because I've always found it hilarious that we have Easter in April here in New Zealand when our seasons are flipped and it's actually Samhain at the end of April. So I was saying, to me, April's always like a harvest and a connecting with our ancestors and our dead. And I think that also ties into Matariki, because that's similar practices as well, right? And that's so April can be a really lovely time, especially with all the destruction and things going on in the world, to sit in the garden and do some meditation, or, you know, light some candles and just, you know, connect with those who have passed on, even if they're not your immediate family, you know, and they're people halfway across the world from us. So yeah, but this conversation's been so good because I don't know much about biodynamics at all, and I'm just stepping into it. So this has been really fascinating. Thank you.
Oh,
I'm gonna bring it back to the subject matter, Christina, the calendar. With the approach of Easter, we'll be going into descending phase, so it'll be perfect time to be putting an autumn 500 on for anyone interested. Yeah, the ascending phase runs out at the end of March.
We had a little look at that before you came with the
Okay.
calendars, but no,
I gather that
I
that's
think-
the reason I've been quiet.
Yeah, no, but I think that's really important, you know, to sort of look at this whole death and resurrection picture, and this, you know, changing of the, you know, the solstices to the equinoxes, and this whole yearly rhythm that we do live in, and, you know, starting to work with those ascending and descending forces and waxing, waning forces. You know, as something new to take forward into the next year, really would be good. Any last anythings? Because I just wanted to read something from the soul calendar that is in Brian's calendar, which kind of ties in with your question, Katrina. Are we all good for me to do that? HD, you want to ask?
Yeah,
anything?
let's go for it.
Go for it. Okay. So the soul calendar is something that's of the year, and it has a different, every day it has a different little meditation or verse. Some translations are a little bit dodgy and some are easier to understand, and so Brian connects that in his calendar and in his work quite a lot, so that you can work with not only what's happening in the southern hemisphere but also the northern hemisphere, because you can read the two together, which perhaps gives a bigger picture. But just for April, since we'll be moving into just the Easter connection there, it's jumping ahead from March, but anyway, freed from the physical body confines and birthed again into spiritual worlds, we expand out into the lower planetary spheres. The task now is to free ourselves from earthly desire attachments, habits, and the effects of illnesses, which would prevent us entering into the spiritual world. We come clearly to experience and know what we have done to others, and begin creating soul drives to make future karmic amends for our next incarnation. From the sun sphere, we transition into the lower spiritual world of the Mars sphere of physical archetypes. All that we experienced and carried out in our last incarnation, especially our deeds of love, undergo a further development, a digestion, a maturation. So I thought that was quite a nice ending for ascending, descending moons and the different rhythms and so forth. And we can't help but not be connected within ourselves, because we are the world and the world is us. And so maybe we can all take that away. And I thank you all very much for jumping on, and hope that some of what we've talked about is a bit inspirational and helpful. And I appreciate all your lovely wisdom and content, everyone.
And
Thank
thank you, Christine, for bringing it all together.
That's okay. Simon left me in the lurch. I have to give it to him next time. No, he's it's great that you can turn up. I mean, it's such a crazy time of year.
I've literally hopped out of the truck, walked inside, and jumped on here to catch up with you guys. I not know where you're at.
Thank you. Appreciate it so much for you being here. Cool. Thanks, everybody. Maybe
Sorry for not
lovely.
being here.
next month, and yeah, have a lovely equinox has just happened, but have a lovely Easter anyway. Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
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 Oh well.